I remember a stage of my childhood when every night, on schedule, a group of strange men would enter my home and would come walking up the stairs into my bedroom, where they would stand over my bed laughing demonically and would talk to each other about me. This was a horrifying and traumatizing experience that I will never forget. I couldn't even discern whether or not these were dreams or not. While laying in my bed, trying to fall asleep each night, I would always hear the front door downstairs open and shut, and the group of men would come loudly stomping up the stairs, laughing and discussing things I mostly don't recall. I would always freeze up in a state of panic and hide under my covers and pretend to be asleep, but they always knew I was awake. They would stand over my bed talking to each other about strange things, and occasionally, as if remembering I was in the room hearing them, they would start laughing and mocking me with statements like,
"He thinks we don't know he's awake."
I remember they would even scream out whatever thoughts I would be thinking just to mock me and demonstrate their ability to read my mind. Like,
"Why don't they just leave?"
right after my thoughts were, why don't they just leave? Whenever they saw I was trying to burrow myself deeper in the covers, they would just laugh louder and scream out things like,
"Look at us."
Their voices were disturbing. Whenever just one of them would speak, especially when screaming, it would sound like multiple voices projecting at the same time, although it was coming from just one of them. Sometimes, I did peek over the covers just to look at them. I remember they wore all black jumpsuits and black boots, and all of them had pale, ghostly skin and skinny, bald heads. They would just stand there and observe me like they got some type of thrill just off my state of shock and terror. I lived with my mother but saw my father frequently. They were divorced, and I remember constantly telling both of them about this. And my mother even talked to people at churches we attended about it. They always resulted in my mother praying for me, my grandmother praying for me, and both of them reading scriptures to me, having me recite the scriptures, etc. My father wasn't very religious, so he would only reassure me it was just bad dreams or only my imagination. I thought he knew better though, but didn't want to make matters worse by entertaining it. It came to a point where my mother began letting me sleep in her room, but it still didn't stop. Every night on schedule, they would follow the same routine. I would hear the front door open and shut, and hear them stomping up the stairs and into the bedroom to taunt me. It got worse. My mother, with the advice of my grandmother and elders at the church, began to have me recite the 23rd Psalm of the Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me into the paths of the righteousness for his name's sake. Yeah. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." My mother would have me learn and recite this scripture during the day and just before going to bed at night. I wish I could say this made them go away, but it was quite the opposite. This always made it worse. Their laughter would always get louder when they would begin to recite the verses along with me, but in their sickening and mocking voices.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in the green pastures.
They made it clear to me that the words of the Bible could not harm or stop them from harassing me. As a result, I began to hate these type of Bible verses and even began questioning Christianity itself. And I was only around 7 or 8 years old at this time. One night, I recall begging my mother to stay awake so she could witness it, or so they wouldn't come at all. She agreed that she wouldn't go to sleep until I did. So on schedule, I remember them coming in and stomping up the stairs as usual. And that's where things got crazier than they ever had before. My mother was laying there with her back facing me, and I began shaking her shoulder and whispering in her ear, Mommy, they're here. Are you awake? Wake up." She didn't respond, so I knew she had let me down and fell asleep. This frustrated me deeply, and as they got closer to the bedroom, I remember repeating over and over for her to wake up while grabbing her, shaking her, finally pulling her around so that she was facing me. At which point, I continued to shake her and beg for her to wake up. At some point in this commotion, she began moving and grunting, and then her eyes finally opened and she looked at me. I remember smiling and saying something like, "Thank God, you're awake, they're here." This is when the most horrifying thing in my whole recollection of all this happened. Her eyes, they literally began to slide backwards into her head until I was staring into empty eye sockets. All I could do at this point was scramble as fast as I could under the covers in isolation, shaking, crying, while the group of visitors entered the room laughing and taunting as always. I even remember waking up one night when I stayed at my father's place and seeing one of them standing alone over the bed, staring down at me. I remember freezing up and staring dead into his eyes before scrambling under the covers. This was the first time I had ever seen any of them at my father's place, so I was mostly in shock that this was happening somewhere other than my mother's place. I remember this particular one looked angrier than they normally did. He stood over the bed, clenching his jaws tight, and breathed heavily as if he wanted more than anything to strangle the life out of me. This was different from the normal routine, and that he was actually gone when I peeked back over the covers to see if he was still there. This normally wasn't the case with the others at my mother's. I don't remember exactly when these occurrences stopped, but in my memory it seemed like it persisted for years and years. I've theorized many explanations to this since then. Everything from aliens to Matrix agents to demons. I even considered that someone may have cursed me or my whole family. Keep in mind that throughout this period of my life, I still had normal dreams and nightmares in my sleep, but I remember this being something distinctly different. I could sense and feel that these occurrences were real and not dreams. I had just moved into my new house. It was a nice 2-story home in a small town. After I had set everything up, I immediately got dressed for bed. I remember being a bit cold when I climbed into bed, but I just brushed it off. The next day I woke up and started to look for some possible job opportunities, but That's when I felt it again. The same cold breeze. All of my windows were shut and my air conditioner was off. And it was summer, so it's not like it was cold outside. Anyway, I got dressed and headed out to town. When I got back, things were in weird places. For example, my knives, spoons, and forks were messed up and my chairs were a bit out of line. Now, I had always been a believer in ghosts. Growing up, I remember doors randomly open and seeing dark figures in the corner of my eye. But those could all be easily explained. But this... The only reason this could happen would be if someone broke in. But given the fact that it was a small town with barely any history of crime in it, and the fact that there was no evidence someone had broken in would lean to the fact that something paranormal is going on here. So at night I set up 2 cameras in the house, one in the hallway which had a good view of both the kitchen and the living room and my bedroom. I went to sleep that night, and I remember having a strange dream. In it, I jumped from my window into my backyard and tried climbing the fence. I looked back at my house to see someone standing at the window I had just jumped out of. It was some strange black and white figure looking down at me. I ran into my neighbor's house, but nobody was there, so I ran out and tried running down the street, but I was blocked by some window or something. I turned around and saw someone walking in the middle of the street towards me. That's when I woke up all sweaty. I changed my shirts and drank some water and went back to bed. I woke up in the morning and looked at my recordings. The hall camera was fine, but my bedroom camera told a whole different story. At 3:33 a.m., I saw a transparent figure emerge from my closet and stand over the foot of my bed. For at least 10 minutes before walking out. Then, at 3:44 a.m., I got out of my bed and just stood there for 16 minutes before going to lay back down. Now, I have no history of sleepwalking, so this was completely unnatural. 1 minute after I laid back down was when I woke up from that dream. I would later move out of that house, and so far, nothing paranormal has happened. Hello everyone, my name is Gavin. I was never someone to believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, but after this experience, not only am I left scarred for life, I am now a firm believer of the afterlife and the horrors it leaves. It was April 18th of 2020. I was watching my favorite TV show at home while my parents were at a party away from home. I am a 16-year-old male, so old enough to take care of myself at my house alone. While I was watching TV, I heard a loud bang. I got scared. I didn't know if someone was trying to break into the house or if something in the house somehow fell over. I didn't want to risk anything in case it was someone who was breaking into the house. So I shut off the TV and lights and hid behind my couch. Silence. I heard nothing but faint wind roaming in my house. I was thinking the worst. Either the door had been busted open and the wind from outside got into my home, or I was dealing with a ghost. Around 5 minutes had passed and I was too scared to get out from behind the couch to grab my phone and call my parents. But one thing bugged me. I have one of those Ring doorbells people own to see who's at their door without going there personally, and how it picks up movement by giving you a little alarm. Well, I never heard that. That's what led me to believe it wasn't a person but a spirit or something like that. Even though I didn't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, there was always that thought in the back of my mind to believe that it did exist. Right before I gained enough courage to get out from behind the couch, I heard a blood-curdling scream that resembled a banshee scream. It screamed,
"Where are you, Gavin?"
I started to cry. I didn't want to die. I was so frightened, I had to cover my own mouth with my hands to avoid giving away my position. I heard things around my house get thrown everywhere and things break with the constant screaming from the thing. I passed out from fear. I couldn't handle it. I woke up an hour later in unbearable pain. I managed to get up and walk to the mirror inside my bathroom. I felt blood coming down my back. I looked in the mirror and saw a message on my back carved deeply with some sharp object. The message on my back was weird. I couldn't really read it because it was in a different language. I called my parents without an answer. I got worried. I called the police after them to report the encounter that happened at my house. The police arrived in 30 minutes. While they were on their way, I tried to contact my parents without any answer. Once the police arrived, I showed them my back. They looked mortified. They escorted me to the police station and asked me questions. Then they asked about my parents. I told them where they were and that they wouldn't answer my phone calls. They asked the names of my parents. Once I responded, they looked at each other. Apparently, before I called, they got another phone call that there had been a car crash near where my parents were out partying. They informed me that my parents were both killed in a drunk driving accident. I was distraught. I started crying in the interrogation room while the officers comforted me. Then one of the officers asked me to take off my shirt so he could get a better look at the message. I agreed. His eyes got wide. I asked him what he was afraid of. He showed me his phone where he had been looking up the meaning of the symbols on my back. I looked at the phone and it was the time. It read 3:33 a.m. I was confused and asked the officer what it meant. He told me that was the time my parents were confirmed dead at the crime scene.